Welcome to Life Behind Bars, produced and created by 50mm Media.
Welcome to Life Behind Bars, where we discuss all things prison and crime. I'm Joel, this is Officer Goodwin.
Yep, Graham, you may call me today.
And this is Emma Campbell.
Or Voss,
And this week in episode 2, we're talking about serial killers. So last week we picked up on and we spoke about why we have prisons. And if you haven't listened to episode 1, it's a really good show. You can go back, listen to it. We talk all about why we have prisons, the impact and all the reasoning behind it. And we get a little bit, I guess it got a little bit heated for a moment in part of it about whether we should be changing the way we operate prisons to release some more money to put into society, so on and so forth. They can't remember, it was a week ago.
I remember. We've all got different opinions, and that doesn't make any one or the other less valuable, does it? And good discussions are the way we find out things.
It's certainly a great way, I think, to learn and understand more about but yeah.
And sometimes to challenge our own ideas and prejudices. There's nothing wrong with challenging yourself. And very often we don't do that often enough in society. We get so fixed with our beliefs. We refuse to listen to other points of view because we don't want our own beliefs that we've had for a long time to be challenged. And that's really quite a dangerous place to be, really.
Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. So this week we're going to talk about serial killers. I will say very quickly, if you're actually watching this rather than listening to it, so if you're watching a video cast on YouTube or any of the other channels, you will notice that we're wearing the same clothes. And that is kind of semi-purposefully done. It's because we actually record the episodes back to back in the 1 and the 2 episode, and none of us bought a change of clothes.
Well, that's not true. Last week I wore this shirt.
Oh, did you? Okay.
I've been wearing it all week until now. I'm trying to keep the wastage down now. Not recycling clothes, not using washing powder, saving electricity.
We should try and get ourselves some more sponsors, so we've got some more money coming into the show, and then Graham can afford to wash his clothes.
Can you get a sponsor for underpants, because it's been a while.
Right.
You put that one in.
It makes it so difficult for me then to take your jokes and your jibes and go, so serial killers. So we're going to talk about serial killers today. I think specifically we've got 5 serial killers that we were probably going to subject around, and I assume we'll talk around that a little bit more. They were picked specifically because they're all UK based. There is the most prolific serial killer in the UK, which would be Harold Shipman. So I'm sure we'll have some conversation around there. Fred and Rosemary West, which we've got some specific connections with through the operations we used to have at Gloucester Prison, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Mary Ann Cotton, it's actually a very historic serial killer, the oldest one that we have here, so back in the early Victorian times, I think it was, Georgian times, 1830s. And then Dennis Nielsen, who again we've got some connection with through what happened at the prison in Shepton Mallet. It is worth saying, actually, as we record this, right at the moment, there is a serial killer documentary out in Netflix, which is hugely popular. It's just blown up massively, and people are really into serial killers anyway. I think it's quite that morbid fascination.
Yeah, it's certainly got a popular media.
Why is that? Why is it that people get so? Why do people get so fascinated with serial killers as opposed to just a killer?
Well, it's that. I guess that's the difference between that emotional loss of control of a solo killer?
Solo killer, yeah.
I often wonder whether people are fascinated by it because they actually can't understand it at all.
Yeah.
And we can't get our heads around it. It's like we don't understand the universe, how big it is. We can't get it.
There's something very calculated about
because we can all understand
doing
about
something again and again,
and motivations and the psychology.
Because it's fair to say that I think we could all understand. Everybody has reached a point where you're like, oh my God, I'm going to explode, and that's it. I could murder somebody right now, type of stuff. So that emotional, which I think solo killers is more of an emotional kind of burst in the moment type of crime, whereas a serial killer is a premeditated, thought out process.
There's a whole different things going on. Serial killers really are set apart from what we call standard. It sounds awful, this, but you know what I mean. People
really
that get.
I know. That's the beauty of this show, though, is we can take a serious subject
on a one-off basis. Serial killers do.
People that get murdered on a one-off basis.
Commit murder on a one-off basis.
Let me just bring this back. So let me just bring this back very quickly, because it is a difficult subject. It's a sensitive subject, but I think this is it. If we picked a specific killer and went, right, this killer, I'm not going to do one now, but this killer who murdered a person, it was prevalent, it was recent, it was in the news, we'd respond to it very differently. But as soon as we say serial killers, suddenly there's a little bit more relaxation about the conversation, because they feel so different, almost like they're on pedestals, the same as the Krays, for example, who maybe could be classed as serial killers because they murdered.
It's different when it's...
I'm not sure. I think they were killed.
Okay, what's the definition? What's the definition of a serial killer? Let's start there. What defines a serial killer?
Serial killer is somebody who has committed 3 or more murders, but there has to be a cooling off period between, so there'll be over a period of time.
Is there a specific, it just sounds so ridiculous, doesn't it, a cooling off period? Is there a specific cooling off period? It has to be, so many hours, days, weeks?
It has to be more than hours. I don't know, I don't think there's a specific, it's one of these things that there's a lot of debate between academics and law enforcement and so forth about what the actual kind of definition is, but it's going to be more than hours, because if it's within the day or what have you, that was when you're then falling into the world of spree killers. So spree killers is when you get someone who kills multiple people in multiple locations, but it's within that same period of hours, 24 hours, 10 hours, 24
Probably
hours.
within that thought process.
So the emotion
when I'm
hasn't
doing you,
gone down.
I'm going to go down the street in a car and I'm going to shoot you,
Whereas
randomly.
So that would be like the London Bridge
they're not
attacks,
serial killers.
American schools, which we tend to see.
You might
that might be, if they go
mass
for more
killers.
than one, there might be mass killers, because then it's one location. So a mass killer is multiple people in one location. Whereas spree killer is multiple victims in different locations, and the serial killer, they have to have that cooling down period in between. That cooling down is about basically turning back to normal life, effectively. They could be
because that's the scary thing, isn't it?
That
is the scary thing.
They could be working, they can be a normal, could appear as a normal member of society to everybody else.
I think with a serial killer, you might say there'd also be an element of motive and opportunity. So these opportunities aren't there like they are with people that are spree killers, because they're not looking for the opportunity. So they're just going to do it. Whereas the others, they have a break, they go back to their normal lives, and then something drives the next time that they feel the need to do that.
I was going to say that's where it comes down to a kind of psychological gratification. There's a desire there.
The part of the build up to it, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, let's get into it. Who should we start with? Serial killer wise, have we got? Do you want to start historically?
Well, if I remember right, with is it Cotton?
Was
she a poisoner?
She was. Yeah, Black Widow.
Of husbands or just?
And children.
Yes.
Husbands and children. So 3 husbands.
Yeah.
I want to say 11 children that they think that they might be more.
I'm going to be honest now. I've got my computer over here in front of me, so I can reference notes, because I think it's important.
So was it based on
She was
finance?
the first one to do it on life insurance.
Yeah, so it's based on. So it's motive. The motive is greed.
Yeah, and financial.
Financial.
I remember there was 5. I don't remember what the dimes and something shillings, something like that.
Yes.
I can't remember what
Mary Ann Cotton, born in 1832, 31st of August, which actually won't be dissimilar time to when this show goes out. 1832, so obviously, what's that, 100, 200 odd years ago now, 190 years ago. She, absolutely right, she murdered, I think it was 3 husbands and 11 of her 13 children. They were all done through poison, through arsenic. The husbands were all murdered for insurance policies, for payments, and she became known as the Black Widow because obviously she was poisoning husbands.
The interesting thing is there's more, I think, that they haven't accused her of, but there was other people in her life that died suspiciously of stomach problems as well. So
arsenic was popular because they couldn't discover it quite so easily in the body.
And I wonder whether there was obviously the financial gain, looking at the fact that she did it after life insurance policies were put in place.
Do you think the kids were in the way then? Because we understand why she murdered
some
men.
of the children had life insurance policies.
Yeah, so I wonder whether they were part of that motive, or were they just in the way now? or the potential witnesses to crimes, and I just wondered about but then you'll never truly define. Sometimes you can define why people do things.
She went to they believe she killed around 21 people, which included 3 husbands and 11 children, or 11 of her 13 children. So that takes the total to 14. So where were the other 7? Because they weren't all insurance policy based. Those ones certainly were. So there is that element now of why.
Well, that may be, there may be people that have been well connected to her that are starting to be suspicious about her behaviour, and she realises they're becoming a threat.
That's how she got caught.
So come round for a cup of tea. I've got a lovely piece of cake for you there. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
One off.
Because it's a very calculated crime, and it's interesting because she's female as well. Obviously, you get a lot less female violent criminals, full stop.
Tiny amount compared to males,
But it's a very financial gain. It's a very cold and calculated kind of motive.
And I suspect she probably wouldn't have been the only person. It wasn't uncommon for arsenic to be used, sometimes in 1 or 2 cases, for financial reasons. I don't think it's that uncommon, that is, because it's such a large amount.
Yeah.
But I don't think she was exclusive. Nobody ever did it again.
No, because there was another historical one. We weren't necessarily going to cover her, but Amelia Dyer was a similar thing, because she was the baby farmer, wasn't she?
That's right.
Again, that was a financial gain.
Yeah.
She would bring in people that had who were not married and were pregnant, and then kill off the babies. Like they'd pay a fee for her to help them because society would shun them effectively.
And that was
but then
in the
she'd kill off the
hundreds.
babies.
Yeah, that was in the hundreds.
So that kind of financial gain is a motive for more than, she's not a unique case in that sense.
No, and yet it seems quite odd, because as we move through time with this, I've just been thinking about that motive for that kind of crime and serial killer seems to have not been the motives that are used today. When you think about, if you go back to Fred West,
there's easier ways of making money than killing people from insurance policy, and I'm going to put it out there, because insurance companies are notoriously difficult to get money out of.
Yes.
They will rig it. And in this instance, but in a life insurance policy, and nowadays the way digital is as well, if you're married to somebody and they die and you claim the insurance policy, fine, as long as the inquest has been fine. If you're married to a second person and they die, the digital footprint is such that even if it's a completely different insurance policy, even if it's in a different country with different married names, they're going to go, hold on a second,
have a look at this.
That's 2 people. By the time you get to the 3rd, that's going to be red flags everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
So 3 or 4.
I think it's actually 4 in total. Well, 3 husbands, I think, a fiance, but it's difficult to tell because obviously it's so historic. The records were different there. And she was caught, and she was caught through. And funny enough, that it uses that phrase. I don't know if this is where it originated from or not, but rumor gave suspicion. Rumor gave rise to suspicion. So people suspected she was doing this. Yeah, because the rumors started.
All these people disappearing around her, getting more and more insurance claims.
Don't want to marry her, Graham, because you might end up in the ground.
Where your kids gone? But so she may have moved, of course, to alleviate.
So because of that, they started looking into it, and then what happened was one of the doctors then discovered some arsenic in the body of one of the victims.
It was doctors that flagged them initial suspicion, wasn't it? How many infants had died.
And then it grew and it grew, and then she was charged with murder. She was tried. She was she was tried, and she was convicted of murder. And back in those days, if you're convicted of murder, the sentence was
hanging.
Yeah.
She was hanging within a couple of months, wasn't she?
Yeah, Durham jail.
In actual fact, if you look throughout history with people that were looking at the death penalty, the gap between going to court and the actual hanging is really very, very short.
Yeah.
These things.
I think from her being caught, she was within a couple of months.
Yeah, always are.
She was arrested on the 7th of January 1873. Her trial began on the 5th of March 1873, so there's 2 months between arrest to the trial starting. I think how long it would take now if you were arrested for suspicion of 3 murders of husbands and 11 children. That would take a year and a half to get to court. Not to mention the backlog because of COVID. But it would take so long. So she was then, 2 months between the arrest and the trial starting, and then she was executed on the 24th of March.
Yes.
19 days. So between the start of the start of the trial and execution, 19 days. I think Johnny Depp's trial was longer than 19 days.
The trouble with that is going back in that time, their processes may have been less efficient, not more efficient to do it quicker. They may have been less efficient.
Oh, absolutely.
Less rigorous. That's
I think you did this. Guilty.
Exactly.
The barristers,
It's a difficult one to look at in terms of why, because beyond the motive, what led her to be able to commit those crimes, because it's such a long time ago. I don't know how much background we have, but like you said, to look at that motive and how that's changed with time is interesting, because for it's obviously a long time, 190 odd years, financial gain is it feels, I don't know, it's like we said, a cold, I guess. It's a strange motive when a lot of it, when you look at more recent cases, are much more...
Wow. What about
let's do that. Let's talk about the Doctor of Death.
Let's talk about Jeremy Bamber when it comes to financial gain, because that's what he was convicted of, murdering based on financial gain.
Yeah, it was he a serial killer?
Yes, he killed 3 or 4.
Oh, it's only just...
Well, he wasn't a serial killer, he was a mass killer.
Yeah.
Because he killed them all at the same time.
Let's jump onto the... And I think what was, and Emma picked it up earlier, one of the most, I say interesting is such the wrong word, but it becomes that, it's that morbid fascination. Yeah. With Marianne Cotton, female serial killers are so rare. They're so few and far between. There's a few in America, but actually in the UK there's only been about 3 or 4 big ones. And solo ones, absolutely.
Because
there's not
serial killers, really.
There's not many. But let's talk about Dr. Death. So Harold Shipman, the UK's most prolific serial killer in terms of the most amount of people killed over the longest period of time. And I don't think he'll mind me saying this, but Graham's obviously slightly older than we are. So although it was 2004 when it happened, we remember it. You will obviously remember it far clearer, and you'd have been working in the prison service at that time. You wouldn't have started working in the prison service in that time. 2004, it's been just on the cusp.
Literally just before.
So Harold Shipman, 250 victims estimated.
But he wasn't convicted of 250. He was convicted of far, far less.
15.
Sorry?
Yeah.
15.
Yeah.
So by the law standards, he's convicted of being a serial killer of 15 people. Suspicion means nothing. But we can say what we like now because he's dead, of course.
Wasn't there 200 and something that they think he definitely did, and then 250 that they suspect? So like another 40 or beyond that they don't have.
218. They've identified 218 victims.
I was going to say,
so they're arguing
they think it would be up to 250.
It's only necessary to convict him of 15 to be
because it makes no difference to his sentence.
Well, no.
Unlike in America where they'll make it 1,000 years in prison or whatever because it's not like per victim.
Well, he was somebody that was going to go to prison for life. I'll whip down through it in a second. I mean, he died in 2004.
Yeah, it took his own life.
He did, yeah, which is another subject I think we should pick up because they spent a lot of effort back when we were executing people in making sure that people that were due to be executed stayed alive until they were executed.
Justice will be seen to be served.
Exactly. But now what happens is people get sentenced to, we'll talk about with Fred West as well, they get sentenced to however long and they commit suicide in their cells.
I mean, I've no doubt that was quite a calculated thing he did. He didn't lose the balance of his mind. He knew that he was never, ever getting out of prison.
Yeah.
Because he was given a whole life tariff anyway. So he just decided that better now than later.
And
but it's his motives for his crimes I can't get my head around. Because we understand with things like Fred West how that's driven, and your Dennis Nielsen, how that's driven. But it wasn't financial. He gained nothing from it financially.
He was high echelons of society.
There was no sexual element built into it, so there wasn't that driver. So was it godlike complex?
I think it is a power-driven thing. It's that control over a situation.
80%
I don't see what.
80%
and I didn't work with him. I don't know.
But he was doing them a favour.
80% of his victims were elderly women.
Yes.
The youngest they believe was 41. Yeah, 41. You're good at this. You're good at this game. Emma's mastermind subject. Serial killers, please. Yes. And the crimes they committed. Sorry. So it was the youngest was a 41-year-old man actually, but majority of them were female and were elderly. So the youngest they believe might have been as young as 4, but they don't know. In a high position in society, this is somebody that would have gone to work, killed someone, and then gone home and just gone about their day.
Yeah. And then went and saved another 20.
Yeah. How do you?
And he goes, the best doctor I've ever had. He's a wonderful, wonderful doctor. He's literally.
How has he picked his victims? I don't.
Yeah. Why did he choose who he chose? Because they weren't all at death's door.
We both looking at
They weren't all
psychology.
like-
We're both turning at the same time. We're both sort of getting to the kind
we're
of
not
like-
looking at somebody that says that person was going to die anyway now, so I'm just going to help them along the way.
It's about his own desires again, then, isn't it?
was
It's
his
not
own-
about
his own beliefs
anybody
about-
other than himself. So therefore,
Yeah, really quite dangerous, really.
it would make sense that there's a connection there with his need to control things, or
Yeah.
that godlike, as you put it, complex. It's like
It's harder
because if
to
there's
understand than Fred West, believe it or not.
Yeah.
To
Oh,
me.
yeah, by far, because this is
And I don't think-
somebody that in society
Yeah.
had upstanding, a well-paid job, and a good career, would have been put on the pedestal again, would have gone off and had golf and
At a
dinners
retirement
and,
age, I believe. He
things
was
like
in his
that.
60s, well, into his 60s, wasn't he?
He'd
Yeah.
been doing it for a long time.
Time, yes, of course
I
he
can't
did,
remember
yeah.
how long the period was they believe he was committed.
1975 to 1998.
Exactly.
So it's
That's
a
a long
23
So
time.
ever since he was a young doctor.
He was killing people before I
Wow.
was born.
Yeah.
Yeah, well before we were born.
Yeah, when I was a young man, really, and you just think a whole life of it.
It's a hard one to understand because the motive is so. Well, I guess we see more that are sexually driven, or that kind of.
Well, that's a different driver
Desire.
altogether, isn't it? That's a different driver.
Yeah.
Rather, because this is quite calculated, I think. Quite calculated. And over all that time, he never got to a time where he felt that I don't want to do with it anymore. I think he become. I don't know. Did he become accustomed to it? Did he normalise the whole process? And he just become, well, yeah, it's your turn.
Just managing to live your normal life whilst committing that many murders, and not getting. I don't know how to say that. Not getting bored of it. Not like. Do you know, it didn't grow. It didn't. Change. Sometimes with killers you see the violence increase, or you see that they need more to reach that same way as drug dealers need stronger drugs. Drug takers need stronger drugs. The thrill, sometimes they need to get more violent or more.
After it's been
whatever
normalised, they need to
is,
move on again.
to be able to get that same
Weird,
kind of desire met. But there doesn't seem to be any change over a very long period of time.
No.
It's a funny one as well. I mean, there's lots of bits in here. I won't go into too much because I want to get into some of the other serial killers. But there's some funny bits in here as well, because there was the way the sentencing was done. He was given 15 life sentences to be served concurrently, so he had a full life tariff there, or technically 15 full life tariffs.
I don't think we have a legal definition of consecutive life sentences.
No,
I don't think it's available to judges to give them consecutive.
It was concurrently.
It's either a whole life tariff.
But then there was the change in, I think 2 years later, I'm just reading it here, the Home Secretary at the time, which was David Blunkett, confirmed that the judge's whole life tariff, I think those kind of changed, and there was they lost their power to set minimum terms for prisoners.
Yes.
So he just kind of went in there just enough time.
You still can give the whole life tariff. You don't have to give what they call the open door.
I think it's the fact of minimum terms for prisoners.
Yes, but minimum. It's the minimum time you would serve in jail.
But now whole life tariffs are based on. Can you have a whole life tariff? Or based on programming? You can be released if the.
There are only certain offenders that can get it, and you're looking at normally serial killers, mass killers, terrorism.
There's 43 or 44 prisoners. I think it's 44.
I thought it was closer to, but my last figures are about 68 prisoners that are serving whole life tariff. But they will alter a little bit as somebody dies, somebody will step into their place. And that's the way it is.
There's not many. Maybe we'll pick up a show on that at some point.
Interestingly, I mentioned at this point, because I know it's not about the serial killers, but it is the person that was the brother of the Manchester bomber that killed the 22 people. When he was convicted, because of his age, the judge is not allowed to give them a whole life tariff. So to get over that, they said 55 years as a tariff date, which would take him just
Which
about
is what
up
I'm
to
saying,
the
is
end of his
that
life anyway.
there was a change sort of just after Shipman.
So we could give them 55 years as a minimum term.
For what they could do.
But he was too young. You can't give somebody, I think it's under the age of 18. I think.
There were a number of other crimes, though, they could have charged Shipman with, and they could have prosecuted him with. They just didn't feel it was worthy of the taxpayers' money because he'd already had 15 life sentences. He was going to die in jail. What's the point? So there are those, and he was sentenced in 2000, and he killed himself pretty much 4 years later to the day. I think it was a few days in between.
Yeah.
He killed himself in 2004, so just before his 58th birthday. So he was actually 54 when he was convicted, wasn't he?
So that leads to an interesting thing, really, because when you say that people should be kept alive to serve their sentence, so justice seems to be done, you're not going to put somebody on a suicide watch for 4 years. When they first come into prison, you put them on suicide watch because that's their high risk time. Fred West killed himself within days of being in prison.
Well, he wasn't even in prison. He was in holding.
No, he was locked up in
Gloucester.
Gloucester.
But he was
transferred to Birmingham.
We'll come on to Fred West to say, but he was in process.
Yeah,
so
they
he's different.
processed him to Birmingham.
He wasn't convicted. By
Yes,
he was
but they
waiting.
nearly always put them on suicide watch depending on the offence
So
and the risk of doing
we'll come on to that.
So 4 years later, somewhere around the time, you're just going to have to take that condition off them because you'd have literally 90% of your prison service of prisoners on suicide watches permanently.
Let me use this very quickly, and I want a very, very quick answer from you both. I'm going to do it as a closed question. If you watched episode 1, you'll see how well Joel performed.
Closed questions.
You see how well Joel performed with closed questions with Emma and Graham.
I won't.
I'm going to ask you a closed question. You choose to answer how you like. Short, sharp answers, because we're going to cover this subject in a different episode. Somebody like Harold Shipman, we know did the crime.
Yeah.
That's undisputed that he did it. He's had at least 15 victims, undisputed, possibly as many as 250. Once this person's convicted, should they not just be executed?
So we'll give you
It comes back to the trouble is it comes back to that thing, and if you've got execution as a possible punishment, there's always the risk of error.
I totally get that. I
So therefore
understand
you
that.
have to take it off the
But
table.
when it's completely undisputed, like this is, do we agree that this is undisputed, that he killed these people?
As far as we know at this moment in time, yes. Because we can only go by what we're told.
I don't know him. I don't know his files. I know what the media tell me. I know what the courts tell me.
Let me put it this. He denied his guilt. He said he was innocent, disputing the scientific evidence that was against him. I'm reading it here, which is why I'm looking over here. But the scientific evidence at that time was undisputed. And even now, scientific evidence back in 2000 was pretty good. I would be confident in saying that he did this.
There was a young man arrested for murder some years ago now. He had an Eastern European name. It was Kisko or something like that. Stephen Kisko, I think his name was. And he was convicted of murdering a young girl. I think it was in a churchyard, if I remember rightly. And he spent quite a long time in prison. And then DNA proved him innocent, of course.
Yeah.
Because they found other DNA evidence, and he wasn't. And they let him out. And he actually took his own life about 2 years after he got released. Spent about 17 years in prison. If you take a look at someone like, I'm going to say it, the Birmingham 6 and the Guildford 4, spent 16, 17, 18 years in jail.
Yeah.
And they've had their appeals, and their appeals were lost originally, and it's only later on they said they've won their appeals. It doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree with the argument.
Let's not get lost in this, because we'll pick up execution, we'll pick up those crimes. What I was asking, and okay, maybe I'm clearly not going to get an answer to this. What I was asking is Shipman, I guess that is there always an element of, no, there isn't always an element of doubt. There's certain crimes that we know people definitely did, and there could be an argument to say they warrant a death penalty. Is this not one of those?
My problem with answering that question with a yes or a no is that fact that it's not just about that, though. If you turn around and make something a possible sentence, then it's on the table as a sentence.
Yes.
So therefore, there will be another case where we are 100% sure that scientific evidence says it is true, and then it turns out it's not.
You never know.
All right, we're clearly. This is going to be the biggest episode I think we are going to do is going to be.
Sit right there on that fence.
It's going to be
because
capital
sometimes
punishment.
it's correct to sit on the fence.
Yeah.
Because that way you have to start weighing the balance.
Capital punishment is going to be one of, I think, the biggest episodes.
Dropping down to one side or the other isn't always the good answer.
Let's take a quick break and listen to and hear from one of our sponsors, I should say. Listen to us. Oh God, you've got to listen to one of our sponsors now. Let's hear from one of our sponsors, and then we'll come back and we'll speak about Fred and Rosemary West.
You are listening to Life Behind Bars, produced and created by 50mm Media.
Unlock the past and discover what life was like at Shepton Mallet Prison. Relive the history of past prisoners over the last 400 years. Experience what a Victorian prison cell was like for those incarcerated. See where executions were carried out. Walk the landings and prison wings. You'll hear stories of those who worked and lived behind its high walls. See it, touch it, feel it on a journey of discovery at the nation's oldest prison. Visit SheptonMalletPrison.com today to find out more.
You're listening to Life Behind Bars, produced and created by 50mm Media.
Okay, welcome back to episode 2, where we are talking about... You okay? So, welcome back to episode 2, where we are talking today about serial killers. Funny enough, as we're recording this, the the Jeffrey Dahmer story, which Netflix have done a 10 episode, they called it a mini-series, but I think anything that's 10 episodes should be called a serial series, because it's well above, it's not a mini-series, it's a proper series. But
it's about the 4th time they've had to go with Jeffrey Dahmer, to be honest with you, when it comes to films.
Yeah, we're doing it. And let's stick it right out there. There is something about serial killers that people are fascinated about. They suddenly want to know all about it, the whys, the wherefores, the ins and the outs. And we were talking obviously about that in the first third.
What I think, it's only what I can observe, that when you're looking at serial killers, they tend to be by nature people that do fit into society very, very well.
Yeah.
Under really normal conditions for a long time. Because otherwise they wouldn't be able to get to that point in time. If they were the oddball, you'd notice an oddball straight away.
Yeah. Mr. Brooks was a great example with Kevin Costner. It's about a serial killer. We did watch it, and he has fictional.
Jeffrey Dahmer was actually well educated and sat in quite a high society, didn't he?
Well, that's the thing, is it comes almost into that psychopath scale of manipulation, being able to go under the radar as any other member of society. But have this secret and this manipulation that allows for that, all running alongside it.
Would you say serial killers have to be, or generally would be, relatively intelligent individuals, in the sense of they have to be able to hide their crimes, so therefore there has to be a level of intelligence. They can't just do it by chance. Everything has to be calculated.
Well,
you get caught.
I'm not sure about that. There may be an element of intelligence over education, because we're going to talk about Fred West and Rosemary.
Not academically intelligent, but
no. So they got away with it for a long, long time. So there'd be an element of the ability to be able to live in society and disguise that.
Yeah, they can't be erratic in the same way as some people are. They can't be that kind of just...
It's not by chance, is it?
No, I mean, Fred West was still serving time as a petty criminal here and there.
Oh, he was.
And although he was committing these crimes, so he was just going in and out as,
Let's talk about Fred West then, and I guess in the same breath to a degree as Harold Shipman, Fred and Rosemary West, but maybe a little bit different in the sense of, and we'll take this one with an air of caution, because there are still the families of victims, first generational families, still living today, not that far from where we're actually recording.
Well, there are one or two people that actually survived.
I was going to say, and survived. So I think we will be careful around how we talk about this, because that's no joking matter. I think when people talk about serial killers, and it is glamorized and it is monetized.
We do casualise it when we speak about it, and we don't really take a great deal of regard to the victims.
Yeah, I think
we're focused on the serial killer and not the aftermath that's caused because of it.
That notoriety of it, because it feels so far from most people's reality.
Oh, absolutely.
That it's almost that horror movie level of unreal.
Yes. Because I must be honest, for the people that survived that, and I know that one of the ladies now was on TV not that long ago. It must be a horrific thing to live with,
Well, Trevor McDonald did a series, I believe, on the West. I think it was Trevor McDonald did it. And there's been a few, but I think he did the most well known, or the most the larger of the productions. But
what's amazing about Fred West as well, remember, he had to have an appropriate adult with him when he was being questioned, because they considered his ability to have learning difficulties, to make sure that, because their job that appropriate adult is there just to make sure that they're understanding what's going on and not to answer questions about the things.
Well, Fred and Rosemary West were committed for the murder of at least 12 murders that they know of, and it was between the years of 67 and 87, so over a 20-year span.
Yeah.
And most of them were done between Fred and Rosemary West, and at their house in Gloucester.
Yes,
They both have individual crimes as well, don't they?
He tried to take the blame for everything. There was I watched it not that long ago. He tried to take the blame, and the reason they caught Rose West and be able to convict him of murder is, in actual fact, one of the ones that was committed, he was actually in prison for something else. Because through all that 20 years, he was also caught for what they call petty crimes. He was in and out of Gloucester, left, right and centre.
Absolutely correct.
So she must have been the one, because he wasn't there to commit it, but he tried to take the blame.
They used to say there was a... Sorry, just very quick. There was a saying in Gloucester prison amongst the officers, and around Gloucester is a city centre. If your bike got stolen, your push bike, it was like, my bike's been stolen. Fred's taken it.
Yeah.
Because he was notorious for petty criminals.
Petty theft.
And he would steal people's push bikes, and the officers would joke around, oh, your bike's been stolen, Fred's nicked it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of historical antisocial and deviant behaviours and experiences in both of their histories.
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
And I think the sexual crime side of it, that kind of the desires in their crimes there, I think there was heavily kind of what looks like, which is Rosemary West had a lot of her own distorted ways of thinking around that.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you can lead somebody into that behaviour, because that was sometimes the illusion that he was leading her. You already have to be in that place at some stage. You might just open the door on it. That's about perhaps what it is. I don't know. Let me ask this
one, because Fred West, and again, I'm just picking up here, picking up the history, since we're talking about a few different people today. Fred West had, when he was 13, was charged with raping his sister, I believe it was, raping his sister in 1961, and she fell pregnant, and he was arrested and freely admitted to the police that he had done it, and asked, doesn't everybody do it? So he was tried, and I think, just reading here, I don't think he was put into prison for me. He wasn't convicted. But surely this is the point of prison that we picked up on episode 1. The point of prison is around rehabilitation and prevention. None of those things were
Someone
picked up for
doesn't
him.
everyone do it, and raises their initial prevention question. So if someone believes doesn't everybody do it, then where does that belief come from? Because if that's not normalised,
but why was that not? It's 1961, so I appreciate. We weren't born. You would have been extremely young.
I was about 8 years old.
Yeah, so it's obviously it's not our responsibility. But why wasn't that picked up in 1961? It was picked up. Why wasn't he put in prison in 1961?
I don't think in 1961 anywhere near that ability to pick up those kind of behaviours. We didn't have that kind of skills in this country at that time. We'd have had some skills with psychologists and psychiatrists, but it wouldn't have been like it is today, where we would be looking for those motives and that background.
And even
he was 20 at the time, and his sister was 13, so he was an adult.
Sexual crimes have got some of the got really low conviction rates. Like even more modern days, and reporting and conviction rates are low. So therefore, going back to the 60s, it's going to have been even harder to have.
Is this because historically, or even now, it's DNA evidence, isn't it? It becomes a he said, she said, they said, we said.
Yeah, remember, we're only sometimes convicting people in the last 10 or 15 years because of historic evidence.
Yeah.
When you go back to that, it was happening a lot, and it was only now when those people have grown up that they've come forward to actually bring that stuff to justice. It was always a closed-door situation, wasn't it?
There was a real thing about Fred West. I remember because we as a company, one of our companies opened Gloucester Prison as one of the tourist attractions. We opened 3 sites, and Gloucester is one of them. And I remember when we opened Gloucester, we spoke quite in depth. I think the 3 of us had the conversation. We certainly had the conversation, and our ops director and the site managers, we were having conversations about Fred and Rosemary West, because Fred West had been held at Gloucester Prison for a number of years, in and out as a petty criminal. But he also had been held at Gloucester Prison when he was initially arrested before being moved to Birmingham. Yeah. And the conversations were, how are we going to treat this subject? And we spoke with officers that worked there when Fred West was there, officers that could remember it. They told us all about how the media circus was outside, the fact that when they transported him to Birmingham, they had 3 different prison vans, identical prison vans. When they left, they all went different directions, so they didn't know which one to follow. Only one with Fred West in, the others were empty. They spoke about which cell he was in, so we knew which cell he was in during his holding period before going to Birmingham. And one of the things that they then said to us, but he's been in loads of cells. That was the cell he was in for that short period, but he's been in lots of cells because he's been in loads of cells. And we made the decision very early on not to discuss Fred and Rosemary West, not to discuss their crime, not to discuss his time in prison. When visitors used to come in and ask about Fred and Rosemary West, we used to very politely decline to talk about it. It wasn't part of the tour. It wasn't part of the history.
Well, because there's a danger of what they call morbid fascination.
It was glamorized. I think from our
there is a
perspective,
danger of that. Yeah.
We very much as a business, as a tourism, as a heritage-led tourism site, we very much didn't want Gloucester to be driven by this awful person, these awful crimes, and glamorizing and monetizing that. You could argue that that's part of what that business does, but it's a different discussion. The only referencing point we had was in Gloucester, there's this wall. It's a fascinating wall which dated back to, I think the earliest ones was 1840s maybe, and it was a wall where prisoners had been carving their names into the actual stone.
It was a part of the original workhouse.
It was absolutely one of the oldest parts. And Fred West had carved his name into that when he was there at some point. And after he'd been convicted for these crimes, or after these crimes had been committed, other prisoners went and scribbled his name out, and you could see where it had been etched out.
Yeah.
But yeah, we refused to do it. And I can even remember when we first opened Gloucester, it was the Gloucester BBC, so BBC Radio Gloucester. I can't remember who the presenter was, but it was a guy, and we were just opening, and I'd had a chat with them, and they said, we'd love to have a conversation with you about opening Gloucester and about, what you're going to do there and how exciting it is, and, it should be used as an attraction. So I was like, fine. I was on the phone call, gone fine for about 45 seconds, maybe a minute. And then suddenly, the presenter turns around and goes, well, don't you think it's disgusting? Or I think he said, don't you think it's really bad that you're monetizing Fred West's crimes? I was like, hey? And suddenly it was that media moment of it just completely flipped on its head. I was like, hold on a second, what are you talking about? What's going on here? And we went through this process, and he was asking and pushing about Fred West, and I ended up having to educate him that Fred West actually hadn't died in Gloucester. He said, what, you're going to show people the cell that he died in?
No.
I was like, well, I'm certainly not, because that was in Birmingham, not in Gloucester, but actually in actual fact. But what really got me at that time was that awareness that people are fascinated by serial killers.
It is that. It's because it's like we said earlier, isn't it? It's that step. It's so much. It's that step further than other crimes in terms of understanding it. Lots of people, like you said, can almost identify with that losing control. Yes, most people are able to stop themselves at that point, but it feels more. It feels more understandable how easily it can be. You can take that next step, but to do an ongoing crime and repeat crimes is a very different level of thinking to what most people can do, and that it just begs those questions. It's those kind of hows and the whys, and people often want to understand the background about what's happened for someone to get to there. Are they different? Is there are they wired differently? Is their background the reason? That born or made argument.
Oh, I always think with serial killers as well, because there are so many, it sort of becomes rather less emotional on a victim side of things. When you talk about individual murders and all that, they do focus on the victim as well, of course. Whereas that, because they're all relatively anonymous, and I'm not saying that's a good thing, but they don't really delve into each of those victims, they tend to just use them as to tell the story of the crime. So we sort of sit back, and it's a little bit more detached for us, so therefore I think we're quite fascinated and we can watch it slightly more indifferently than we might when we look at personal things, when you hear about that victim and their suffering in a very personal way. When you think of young Millie Dowler now, that does grab us because we see that as something that could be around our lives, whereas we always sort of I detach serial killers out there as if
create their separate beings, almost that
it's just another world, and it doesn't involve me.
A lot of society will do that, and because there's so much focus on what the serial killer did and how they've ended
It's
up
about
their history.
Yeah.
Like you say, then it desensitizes people from the actual impact on individual victims. Scarily, that's often the case with the actual serial killer, obviously, because quite often they're strangers that they will kill. And again, the victim isn't given any thought in that sense, whereas a lot with emotional killing, it's usually somebody that you know and it's a loss of control.
I mean, there's an old saying, I suppose, they go, everybody's capable of murder. And I suppose in the real world, that's correct.
Because it's an emotional
We're all capable,
response.
depending on the situation, the time, the experience, and the motive, the justification, or the loss of control.
What's going on in...
But, you know, so that changes the argument. But are we inbred? Is it born? Or is it learned behaviour? Because if we're all capable of it, if we're all capable of it, then somewhere along the line it must be already innate in us. So it can't always be a learned behaviour.
Well, society almost prevents us from doing it because we know it's wrong.
Well, where the law doesn't prevent people, remember there's a real...
No, society does, because we know it's a society we live in.
Quite interesting. I say to some of the students I have, and they go, so why, what happens when we break the law? And they go to prison and all that. And then I go, yeah, they do. But do they all go to prison and all that? And so if we didn't have any laws, then it wouldn't matter with it. And what I'm trying to get them to understand is you don't, because they say you'll get caught if you break the law. I go, so the reason you don't commit prison is because you get caught. My argument should be you don't commit crime because it's the wrong thing to do, not because there's a punishment.
Yeah,
we understand why we have punishment.
The society created constructs and morals, isn't there, which a majority of people understand and live by.
Yes.
And that whole sentence of we're all capable of murder, because physically, people are.
Yeah. We actually train people to be capable of murder. They're called the armed forces.
Spend millions of pounds training people.
Regardless of why you send somebody to a war, you're actually asking them to cold-bloodedly kill somebody. We understand the process, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they're murderers.
Because we do have, would that be classed, is soldiers, for example, aren't soldiers who have been in war for a while and killed multiple people serial killers? We're just legalising it.
The difference depends what they're experiencing when they do it, to be honest.
The specification is you kill 3 people over a period of time with a calling off period.
Yeah, but
I think there needs to be the psychological gratification with it as well.
Okay. So we have to label the British Army as serial killers.
It's a really dangerous ground to get into because people don't choose to go and do that, but they accept it may be asked of them to do that under the circumstances that and as a soldier you accept your duty to do it, even though you may not be fully in agreement with what you do. You either accept, and that's fair enough too. I've never ever, when we say we shouldn't be in that war, I never judge a soldier of service, but I go, no, they're following their duty. It isn't them, it's those that send them.
And a lot of soldiers come back with PTSD because of the experiences, because they don't necessarily want to do it.
Nobody does.
They have to do
Nobody
it.
does.
But serial killers, do serial killers suffer PTSD in the same way after murdering victims?
I'm not sure. I've never read any evidence to prove that.
No, and this is where I think that gratification element of the motive makes it different, because they are living their life normally whilst they commit it. So therefore, at that point, I don't know. I'm not an expert on it, and I haven't worked long term with people, serial killers, after they have been convicted. But the fact that they're able to continue living their lives and then they continue to go and do that to meet their own desires is different to.
But it has to be different.
Made to do so.
Yes, it has to be.
You wouldn't have seen serial killers in your programs, would you? Because they wouldn't have qualified, because they're never going to be released in that sense.
Well, it's not necessarily about not even being released, but it's the programs that I worked on. Yeah, they did.
Not appropriate in the sense of. So, Fred West, very quickly before we move on, killed himself in Birmingham prison, I believe, whilst awaiting trial. So
he just a few days ago.
Yeah, he'd just been reduced off suicide watch. They've just relaxed his suicide watch, and then he'd managed to asphyxiate himself effectively as the cause of death. But he was able to steal bits of rope and bits of tags off laundry.
Well, you can rip sheets, you can do it then.
I appreciate it. There's always a method of doing it. Is that somebody that we should have been looking at executing? He never went to trial, so he never found guilty.
Well, no, at this moment, but right up to the time that he died and still is, innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah, but is that not somebody that we should be executing?
Yeah. But that's we'll give you the same answers the last time. Don't keep asking the same question.
Okay.
You know what they say? Saying the same thing all the time, expecting to get a different response, as you say, is a sign of insanity.
Okay, right. Well, we'll take a couple of minutes there, and we'll just listen to some words from our sponsors whilst I digest my craziness, I guess. The insanity.
Rose is still sitting up in prison somewhere, isn't she? Yeah.
She is. Yeah. So here's a quick word from our sponsors, and then we'll be back very shortly.
You are listening to Life Behind Bars, produced and created by 50mm Media.
Welcome to Shrewsbury Prison, Shropshire's #1 tourist destination. Step behind the gates of this 200-year-old prison and discover an unknown world. Heritage tours run by ex-officers, where you can see the cells, walk the landings, see and touch the history. But there's so much more going on. Experience one of our brilliant activities or take part in our world-renowned events. From escape rooms to axe throwing, overnight sleepovers to prison break, we do it all. And there's something for all the family, with activities starting from 8 years, events from 12 years, and heritage tours for all ages. Visit our restaurant and experience food behind bars. There really is so much to see, do and discover on a day out at Shrewsbury Prison. Visit us at www.shrewsburyprison.com.
You're listening to Life Behind Bars, produced and created by 50mm Media.
Welcome back to episode 2 of Life Behind Bars. We're talking about serial killers today. We're coming into part 3 of the episode, and we're moving on to Dennis Nielsen. Now, I think certainly for me, because I saw parts of it, it's a interesting one because they filmed recently a 3-part, not a documentary, but they filmed an actual drama, 3-part drama called Des. And it was filmed at our prison in Shepton Mallet in Somerset. So we've got a connection to understanding a little bit more about not necessarily the crime, but just some of the things that happened in the jail. And also we actually have the cell as it was laid out still set up in Shepton Mallet prison, so people can go and see how it was laid out, which is very similar to the cell he was actually in when he was in prison. So let's pick up on Dennis Nielsen. One of you guys want to start on that one?
I must be honest, I've never really done a huge amount of studying or reading of Dennis Nielsen. I've seen what TV have put up mostly, and I've watched the documentaries. And even though I was in the service when it was taking place, of course, I wouldn't have access to that because he never ever came near a prison that I was in. But not a lot of conversations around about it either. So, but I know what I know, and you know. Yeah,
well, let's pick up for people that haven't heard of Dennis Nielsen, I'm not sure. So he was a serial killer who'd been murdering young men, Scotland, I believe it was. So he'd been.
No, they weren't all in Scotland.
Sorry, they
weren't.
It was. Sorry, I do. I don't know why. He was Scottish. That's where I got. Yeah, that's where I got confused. Sorry, but he was murdering young men who were homosexuals. They were gay. Predominantly?
That was what was said, but I don't know whether they actually said that was the confirmation of that. Because there was a story that I saw once where he picked up a young man that was just out, and he was just out on the street on his own, and they got chatting together, and he invited him back. But I don't know the motive between the two of them was going to be based on some kind of gay relationship or gay sexual.
They said, I'm just reading the
because he may have gone in there just thinking, somebody's asking him for a drink, and I'm having a few beers, and I'm going to go home.
And it rings a bell for me. I think a lot of them seemed to be homosexual, but that there was a couple. Was it someone that survived that said that he wanted to go? He was going back and was looking for his
He was.
If you're lonely, my guys are lonely.
Gay people, homeless people, and also heterosexual males that he was picking up in bars.
His motive might have been sexual, but that isn't the other people's reason why they went back to be with him. Not all of them anyway. There's no evidence to show that it's complete. But
he was taking them back. So this is between 1978 and 1983. So over a span of 5 years, he was taking them back to his home. He was feeding them, giving them some alcohol, and then he was strangling them.
Yes.
So, and then there was this partially known, I guess, sexual gratification pre, post, during the
I'm not sure.
process.
I think Emma might have more background on that one. But
Yeah, I don't know his case very well, but I certainly most of it again is through picking up from like stories in media and online and things, because it's not something, a case I know a huge amount about, but there was certainly talk, I think, of his gratification being met at some point during the crime, which fits with serial killer patterns of behaviour in the sense that there's a desire, and often the death is a part of that.
It wasn't necrophilia basically, was it?
I've heard both. I think I have heard that there was some
this is why I think serial killers become so difficult. This is why there's that double-edged sword. It becomes so difficult, but also so people get really drawn into the macabre of it, because what we understand is what we pick up from the media or from courts, and courts are generally closed courts in the UK. Specifically, they were back then. They might have a media presence, and obviously we know with the media everything gets twisted slightly, because the more dramatic you can make it, the more papers you're going to sell, and therefore it becomes really hard to know actually what's the specifics until you drill down to people who are on the case, studying the case, or are really kind of understand.
Well, John Christie was based on that.
So
that was John. Remember John Christie, the 10 Wellington Place? He was actually offering women abortions. He was a special constable during the Second World War, and then he did other bits and pieces. And he was he rented out flats in his own house, little apartments, and basically he was bringing women in there and saying, "I can give you an abortion," which wasn't a legalised thing in the country in those days. So he was going there and he was gassing them. But what he was doing, he was gassing them, strangling them, and then the sexual event took after the event, not during, after. So his motive for all those things was based on a necrophilia sexual offence. And there was. That's the one where Timothy Evans died, was hanged and charged with the murder of his wife and child. But he'd gone away, and John Christie was giving her an abortion. Well, so he said he would give her an abortion, but he had to get rid of the child as well. So he killed her, did what he did, and then killed the baby as well, and then buried them somewhere down around the grounds again. Because he was a serial killer as well, John Christie. I think at least up to 6 or 7.
Yeah, I think what's interesting with serial killers as well is quite regularly, not all the time, but they do portray their innocence. Dennis Nielsen, again, when he was on trial, pleaded his not guilty all the way through.
It kind of fits though with that. You need to feel some remorse as well to get to that point where, well, I think anyway, you need to have some sort of remorse when you get to that point of admitting guilt, because it's a part of that journey. And someone who's been able to kill over a long period of time, just because you're in court, that doesn't suddenly mean you feel remorse.
Oh.
And also, it's not a new thing for them to continue with a normal life.
I don't, and without the remorse, they go, I got nothing to lose anyway. I'll plead not guilty because I have nothing to lose here, because they already probably know the weight of evidence is against them, and they're going to spend the rest of their lives in jail.
Well, they have no need.
I'll plead not guilty.
Why would they say guilty?
A serial killer is the worst type of criminal.
I don't know, because you've also got mass murderers.
I suppose you're trying to make a judgment is, are more murders any more painful than one? If you think of the victim's point of view, for each one of those victims, it's individual.
Yeah.
It's about their victim. They're the victims, or they're the friends or the family of that victim. So about as whether it's one or two, I don't know. It's a difficult one to answer, to be honest with you, but whether we think it's worse, it appears worse to us because they're randomly killing people.
It's because there's so many.
There's so many and random.
It comes back to the number.
I was going to say, it comes back to that not being able to understand how someone can do something so many times, because that's more than a loss of control. That's a calculated, planned crime. That's a very different way of thinking to other people. But
you're right.
Like you say,
and I think to be a serial killer, you have to have a
victims.
lack of remorse and empathy right from the first one onwards, because if you had empathy and remorse, you just wouldn't step into the next one. So they just carry on with their normal lives, and they don't really give any real consideration about, well, that was wrong and bad, and I feel bad about it. I don't think that enters their mind. They just crack on with life until the motivation and desire pushes it, an opportunity pushes itself in their face.
They need it again.
And they need it again, yeah.
Let me ask this then. The same sort of basis of the army, slightly different, but the same kind of basis, just on what you're saying, just throw it out there. Is Pierpoint a serial killer?
Is he a serial killer?
Because again,
Well, it depends how you define it in law, isn't it?
Joel,
It doesn't
isn't
work
it?
like that.
I think
Because
generally when they look at-
for those that don't know, Albert Pierpoint, so executioner, most infamous, famous executioner.
Well, he's well known because the media was better in the
Yeah,
30s and 50s.
he also did the highest number of executions.
433 men and 17 women, and that's considerably higher than all the others.
That's a big number.
Yes, it is.
And I know it was his job, but at the same time, executioners weren't paid to execute people. Their expenses were paid. They weren't given a salary because
they never have been
because it encourages the wrong type of person.
Yeah, it's not a paid
For
position.
example, like a serial killer.
It's a fee.
But it's is that not because what Pierpoint must have is the ability to turn up to work, execute somebody, go home.
The difference is he is being told to execute someone because they have broken a law that everyone deems
And it's in the name of the
not
law.
okay.
So therefore, we're
Whereas
saying-
they're
but it is-
picking
but to be
people off
right-
the street
aren't-
that
aren't
are
we-
an
aren't we
innocent.
To be
just
honest,
saying
Joel,
to
in its coldest calculation,
Yeah.
you're asking a human being to intentionally take someone else's life. Intentionally do it, right to the point where you'll strap them up and put the rope around them.
hold on.
You're technically in that sense, but we define murder in a different way than we define the justification for why we should take somebody's life. That's the reality.
Oh, I'm not saying that. I'm saying
It's
the type of person that is needed to do that type of role, is that not psychologically a serial killer that just hasn't dipped over the balance?
You know, I've never really seen much to do with how executioners, because there were quite a few of them around the time, how they actually thought. Now, I do know that because I read Albert's autobiography in the 1970s, and I read it again a couple of times because I presented that
well, you talk
when I
about
did
it
the
all
tour
the time.
and all that. But he always said that he felt he had a calling to do it. And that calling came, and he also believed that it was his place to do it quickly and humanely. He also believed that once it was done, it was his job to treat these people in the best respect that he could because they'd paid their price for the crime they'd committed. And when he finally gave up in 1957 and retired, he went on to a commission to talk about the death penalty. And he actually said, I do not believe from the first person I executed to the last person I executed, it ever became a deterrent for somebody else not to.
Oh, we know.
And the reason why I stopped doing it is because I had a calling to stop it. Now, I don't know whether that was based on religion or spiritualism, but he felt that he was going into it because he felt that it was the right thing to do, and he stopped it because he had a calling that it's no longer something that he should be doing. And I don't know how that thinking works.
No, and it certainly takes a certain type of person to be able to desensitize and compartmentalize that part of it.
Because there were executioners that committed suicide. So Harry Allen?
John Ellis did, but
John Ellis,
but he did
John
it for
Ellis,
a particular reason.
Yeah, no, I know. We won't go into that too much now,
Yeah.
but there have been cases, a case certainly, where executioners have not been able to live with themselves because of what's happened.
Well, there may be the risk of innocent as well.
Yeah.
And they might have hanged somebody,
so they have
and later on they go, oh,
commit suicide. But I guess I'm posing the question of, aren't we, whilst one is legal because we say it's legal and the other one is not, but are they the same side of a coin?
Well, no, we don't get the choice to choose that because governments decide what is okay to do and what's not.
No,
I
what I mean
think
isn't Pierpoint and Nielsen, for example, or Shipman, for example, aren't they the same side of the coin?
No, because the government says so. The government said on that side of the coin, we've said to you it's okay, so therefore it's legal to do, and it's not a crime, so it's not
Scrap the legality, the mindset behind it. If Pierpoint wasn't an executioner, would he have been a serial killer?
This is where I'm saying it comes down to the desire and the motive for the death. Now, there has to be a certain type of person to have been able to desensitize themselves and be able to do the job of a executioner.
Yeah. An executioner is doing it because he's been asked to do something in a legal sense, whereas people that commit crimes,
they're not, and they're doing it because they are being told this is to protect society. Whereas a serial killer, in the definition of the law, although there's not a clear definition, but the serial killer is around that. They are not doing it for protection of society. They're doing it to meet their own selfish needs.
If you were saying something like, people, he's technically a serial killer, you go, well, when he did retired, he never killed anybody after that.
Well,
why? Because he's living within the law.
That I think
or he's doing it within the law.
That is probably
exactly.
So he does something.
I'm not saying it. I'm posing the question to try and understand the motivation, I guess, both behind serial killers and those in society that have killed more people than a serial killer, but are not classed or defined as serial killer because society or law
and
says that's legal.
I think that comes down to the fact that the serial killers are doing it for their, they are damaging innocent people to meet their own needs, whereas someone who is doing it as part of a job is, rightly or wrongly, is part of the protecting society. But this is, I think, it comes back to that's why execution probably shouldn't exist as well. It's more killing. More guns doesn't stop gun crime. Killing doesn't stop killing.
You're telling me that America have not got this right, that Trump has not got it right, and going, more guns will help gun crime.
To be able to say that that's wrong, we need to recognise that killing is wrong.
Of course, yeah. And again, I get fascinated by the psychology of it, by both sides of it, from the I guess the prison officer or the legal side and the illegal side. I get fascinated by the whole process, and I guess part of where I was just driving with that question is that I don't believe. There's many people, there will be some very, very disturbed people out there that will disagree, but the majority of people would not celebrate, would say Dennis Nielsen, for example, Harold Shipman, awful people. Should burn in hell, should execute, whatever they might say, awful people. But Pierpoint, lots of people in society would go, that man is a hero.
Yes.
And a lot won't because they don't know who he is, but when they did...
I've seen many people say if they brought the death penalty back, I'd be more than willing to step up there and take the job.
That's something very different. We'll pick that when we come to executions, because we both,
lots of people,
all three of us know that that's something easily said, harder done. But Pierpoint, what he did through the Nuremberg trials, all the Nazis he executed, all the different prisoners he's executed, so on and so forth. And it's just interesting, I find, that on one side, you've got somebody that's executed, so we could effectively say murdered. I don't know, maybe I'm paraphrasing.
Well, you're intentionally taking somebody's life. It's how you define it in law.
438 people. On the other side, you've got Harold Shipman that's killed at least 15, probably 218, maybe as many as 250. This person is awful. This person is more of a hero.
It's a sign of it's a part of history as well, isn't it? In the sense that execution was a part of the criminal justice system in those days, so therefore it's a part of.
It's just funny how society says, because in 200 years' time, will Albert Pierpoint still be a hero?
I don't know.
Because we could, and I don't want to get into it because we've reached the end of the show. But if we took, the Black Lives Movement, which was a really important movement to happen, should have happened years ago. We should never be in the society we are now, still with the challenges that different races and different cultures and beliefs have and such like that. But the Edward Colston thing, which happened in Bristol, that man still had statues up. We had halls named after him, loads of things. And society has now moved so far. They've gone, actually, no. Whilst he did do some good things, the good things he did, he was able to do people's lives. So, and absolutely right. They changed the names of the Colston Hall. They take down the statues. Absolutely. Whether the way it went about was right or not, I don't know. That's a different subject. But society moved. Therefore, in a couple of 100 years, 200 years, we're going to look back and go, I can't believe we kept prisoners in the way we kept prisoners now, like today.
Yeah, definitely.
But you must remember, in history, we have a real problem sometimes in history that when we look back at it, we want to start denying what we don't like about it. Now we're better knowledge about the truth behind it. So you'll see people go, well, it doesn't really count. And I go, well, the reason we look back in history is that you look at history to see where you think should go in the future.
Yeah.
So if you're not prepared to open it and accept those things, and that they do need, and they are, because a lot of people say, oh, well, that's history, it doesn't matter. And I said, so then in another 50 years' time, Jimmy Savile doesn't matter then. He was a good guy, really. Why? Because he kept people in the television, and he helped people, and he ran for charity. Well, he did all those things to those young children. I mean, it doesn't matter, really. Why? Because it's history. And that's the argument they used against Colston. They said, well, in history, it doesn't matter now, because he did lots of good things, and we shouldn't talk about his bad things. They go, then that says, leave the statue up, because they took the statue down for Jimmy Savile.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Said, well, we did a lot of good things. So in 100 years' time, people could look at that and go, no, you mustn't take the statue down. Why? Because it happened 100 years ago, it doesn't matter. Of course it matters. It matters as much as the good things you do. The bad things that you've done matter as much. They have to.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't just dismiss one over the other. You can't cancel the life of somebody out because you've done something good for somebody else. Well, he's dead. Well, he was a slave. I just killed him. He's pointless. But I've given you a house. Oh, that's all right then.
I think it's you need to use history to learn from it and be able to then make judgments with modern
society's
constructs.
People that don't learn from history are condemned to repeat it.
Yeah, and constructs will always change, society will always change, so therefore you need to use the past to learn from that. About how that's used is obviously another debate in terms of how things like statues are torn down, but the debate needs to be opened up to be able to learn from it. But I also think it's dangerous sometimes people can make judgments on current people based on very historical links, and it's like I don't think that's necessarily fair either, just because a modern day person who's got a great grandparent, they can't be held responsible for something that they did, but you can use all of that to learn.
I did this the other day, and I won't pull up now, but I played cricket with somebody the other day. I played cricket with somebody's son, a politician, very, very well-known politician, bit love or hate, very Marmite, lots of people hate, played cricket with their 13-year-old son, and I sat on the side watching him bowl, and loads of people were berating him, loads giving him abuse, and I ended up turning around and going, guys, I'm not being funny, whilst I get you don't like their father, that's some politicians, that's some females going, I get you don't like their father, but you cannot hold the son responsible for their father's actions.
Now, if the son turns out like the father, you might have a justification.
But at the minute that's not the case, and I think that's where people have to be really clear, because it's really important to learn history.
Sorry Emma, we've moved a million miles away from serial killers. I don't know how we've got well over time.
That's for the post-production to do.
But it's also interesting. How can you cut it? Let's finish it there. This has been episode 2 of Life Behind Bars. We've been talking about serial killers. I'm going to say I hope you enjoyed the episode, but I don't know if that's the right term for it. If you did, please share it. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you.
Found some value out of it, and give us some feedback on those things.
Do send us your messages, your comments. We'd love to hear them. We will respond to all of them. If there's a subject you want to talk about or hear us talk about, then we'll absolutely do. We'll slip it into season 2. So we'll do all of that. Please do subscribe. Next week in episode 3, we're going to be talking about the right side of the bars. So specifically the staffing, from governors through to prison officers, through to the civil servants that work inside prison, and now what is actually a number of civilian staff that aren't civil servants that are outsourced. So we're going to talk all about the staffing, the complex operations, as Graham would put it, of running a jail and everything that goes into it. So that's going to be episode 3. Do join us, and we look forward to seeing you then.
Stay safe, everyone.
You've been listening to Life Behind Bars, produced and created by 50mm Media.